They always said corporate loyalty was a myth, but Mara still believed in something like honor. For 17 years, she built her life inside the walls of Copeland Strategic, a PR firm that grew from a modest local agency into a mid-market powerhouse. She wasn't flashy. Her name wasn't on the building. But when things got chaotic, when a tech client was hacked, when a CEO's marriage crumbled in the press, when a product recall hit just before Christmas, people called Mara. She was calm, efficient, thought 3 moves ahead, and never made anyone feel small while doing it. That's what made her the perfect mentor for Elise. Elise had joined 5 years ago, all high heels and curated chaos, fresh from some boutique agency in Chicago. Her charm was immediate. She could light up a room, make board members laugh, and push boundaries just enough to seem bold, not reckless. Mara had taken her under her wing, taught her the unspoken rules, polished her rough edges. She didn't mind the mentoring. She liked helping people rise. Elise reminded her of herself once, until the day of the promotion. They were both up for the Senior Vice President of Crisis and Reputation, the third chair, so called because it placed the occupant just beneath the CEO and the president. Mara had already been informally doing parts of that role for 2 years. Elise hadn't yet led a full crisis on her own. But at the quarterly leadership breakfast, Mara felt it. The CEO, Alan, gave a speech full of awkward warmth about new energy, bold perspectives, and rewarding forward-looking leadership. Then he clapped Elise on the back and handed her the title. The room clapped. Elise beamed. Mara nodded and sipped her black coffee, her hand so steady it hurt. She congratulated Elise, of course, told her it was well-deserved. She smiled while Elise's eyes flicked away. Guilty. That was the first sign. The second came later that week, in a department all hands, when Elise referenced the dual-phase containment strategy that she had developed during the medical device PR disaster last quarter. That had been Mara's plan. Every word, every late-night tweak. Elise had joined the call, sure, but she'd mostly observed, taken notes, deferred to Mara. Still, Mara said nothing. It wasn't until 2 weeks later, over drinks with Cam from legal, that she learned the whole story. Elise had been sleeping with one of the board members. Not just sleeping with him, positioning herself, strategically, as a confidant. She'd whispered things, talked about Mara like a loyal admirer, a mentor who was losing touch with modern strategy, said Mara needed support to keep up, that she'd guided Elise, sure, but needed someone younger to see the full picture. Cam hadn't meant to tell her. He'd already had 2 drinks and didn't realize the way his words landed like shrapnel. Mara didn't speak much on the ride home. She stared out the window of the Uber, her hands folded in her lap like she was riding to a funeral. She wasn't furious, not in the way she expected. Rage would have been clean. But this was betrayal, intimate and precise. She had poured years into Elise, not just strategy, but belief. She had lifted her, and Elise had calculated every step. Mara did not scream. She did not confront. She did not threaten HR or explode at a meeting. Instead, she started showing up earlier. She took on the crisis accounts no one wanted, the small pharmaceutical firms, the financial services clients with compliance baggage. She stayed quiet in meetings and spoke when others fumbled. She stepped back from being a visible player, and in doing so, she stopped being a threat. People began treating her like background, a dependable fallback. The person who made problems go away without ever needing applause. But behind the scenes, she made moves. She started inviting junior staffers from other departments for coffee, asked questions, remembered names. When an intern from compliance said she felt ignored in meetings, Mara invited her to a prep session and let her present first. When a designer from marketing struggled with approvals, Mara helped get his work cleared. Small gestures, but consistent. Over months, she built quiet loyalty. She also began logging everything: meetings, memos, strategic documents. She started a private folder on a personal drive, one with timestamps, screenshots, even Elise's original edits on documents Mara had written. Nothing illegal. Just clarity, just facts, because she knew something would go wrong. Not out of hope, out of experience. Elise was sharp but careless, overconfident, and crisis PR wasn't just about charm and instincts. It was about stamina, judgment, and knowing when to speak and when to shut up. The opportunity came in quarter two. A global beverage client, one of Copeland's oldest accounts, was about to face a quiet but lethal crisis. A whistleblower had contacted legal. The company had been underreporting allergen contamination in one of its bottling plants. Nothing dramatic, no deaths, no scandal. But enough that, if picked up by media, could threaten the brand's clean process image. Elise took the lead, of course. She brushed past Mara in the hallway the day the account landed on her desk, heels clicking like exclamation points. "This one's mine," she said, half joking, eyes glittering with confidence. Mara nodded once. Of course. She watched Elise rush into the conference room with the brand director, full of bold angles and unearned certainty. Mara returned to her desk and started preparing. Not to sabotage, not yet, but to wait. The whistleblower memo had been clear. An internal technician flagged repeated cross-contamination alerts in one of the client's plants. The data wasn't publicly reported, and no formal recall had occurred yet. But if it leaked, the reputational damage could trigger store pullbacks, allergic reaction lawsuits, and investor pressure. It was a sleeper crisis. The kind that didn't make headlines until it suddenly did. Elise treated it like a branding hiccup. She insisted the contamination risk was statistically insignificant and suggested a preemptive press release to shape the narrative. She assigned 2 junior analysts to write early media copy and pushed the legal review to the side. In the Tuesday leadership check-in, she made a throwaway comment about controlling the optics before legal complicates things. That was the third sign. Mara didn't speak in that meeting. She took notes. Later that day, she quietly reached out to Gregor in compliance. A soft-spoken man with years of field experience, he was rarely invited into the main conference rooms. Mara asked him, off the record, what the actual data suggested. He sent her a confidential breakdown the next morning. It was worse than Elise knew. 3 batches in the last quarter showed cross-contact with undeclared nut allergens. Not trace, but high enough to trigger reactions in allergic consumers. Internal escalation logs showed the plant flagged it twice, but the distribution center shipped the batches anyway. The client hadn't launched a recall because technically no adverse events had been reported. Yet. Mara thanked Gregor, closed the report, and stared at her screen for a long time. She didn't leak the report. She didn't call the CEO or suggest Elise be removed. Instead, she did what Elise didn't know how to do. She began preparing contingency routes. First, she reached out to her old contact at Lander and Rowe, the boutique risk consultancy that Copeland used back in its earlier days. They had no contract now, but Mara still sent them a scenario brief, stripped of names, and asked what they'd recommend if the data went public. Second, she looped in the head of internal communications, Amelia, under the guise of general preparedness. She framed it as a mentorship moment, walking her through how they would theoretically handle a client-level product disclosure crisis. By the time Friday arrived, Mara had 6 options drafted for potential narrative framing, a list of legal safe terms for media use, and a social contingency plan for allergic risk communication. She printed nothing, saved everything to her private drive, and waited. 2 weeks passed. Elise launched the client's transparency campaign, a performative PR piece that spoke vaguely about rigorous quality checks and commitment to consumer wellness. No mention of allergens, no nod to internal alerts. She basked in the brand's retweets, reposts, and a favorable write-up in AdTech Digest until Monday morning. Mara arrived to a hush in the air. The receptionist looked tense. Slack channels were quiet. Someone had posted a link in the PR team's group thread, then immediately deleted it. Mara didn't need to click. She already knew. The whistleblower had gone public. A freelance journalist had run a feature on Medium. A full breakdown, complete with anonymized lab logs and insider emails. It wasn't a front-page scandal. Not yet. But it was already being picked up by watchdog food blogs, allergy parenting networks, and a few ESG investment forums. Within hours, the story began trending. Elise panicked. At 10:14 a.m., she called a leadership huddle. She stormed into the war room with her assistant trailing behind, flipping through unmarked folders. She demanded hourly media reports, called the beverage client's VP on speakerphone, and insisted the company issue a statement of reassessment, which meant nothing and satisfied no one. Mara sat in the back. She watched Elise fumble through the press call, misquote the product line, then contradict the legal department about pending compliance steps. The client grew increasingly short. The room's energy shifted from tense to uncertain to something quieter and more dangerous. Doubt. At 1:37 p.m., during a break, the head of the client's risk division emailed Alan directly. He asked if there was a more experienced crisis lead who could be looped in. Elise didn't see it immediately. Alan did, and he forwarded it to Mara. Nothing more. No subject line. No greeting. Just the forwarded message. Mara stared at it for a full minute. Then she stood, gathered her folders, and walked toward Elise's office. She paused at the door, not to knock, but to listen. Elise was inside, on the phone with the board member she was still quietly involved with. Her voice was low, sharp. She was already defending herself. She said nothing. Why would she wait until now? She didn't flag anything earlier. This is sabotage. I think she wants my seat. Mara turned and walked away. She didn't need to confront her. She had what she needed. That evening, the board scheduled an emergency conference call. Elise was asked to join, but not to lead. Alan invited Mara to attend as a resource. She arrived with binders, data-backed, legally cleared, time-stamped. She laid out the scenario planning she'd done weeks ago. She gave them controlled message options, audience-tested risk language, and stakeholder comms already drafted for each escalation tier. When someone asked how she was so prepared, she just said, "I've seen how fast these things move. I didn't want us to get caught off guard." No one questioned her. Not even Elise, who sat 2 seats away, lips tight, fingers gripping the edge of the table. Mara didn't look at her. The client issued a real statement that night. Mara wrote it. The legal team blessed every word. The story didn't vanish, but it stabilized. The CEO thanked her directly in the post-call debrief. And 2 days later, the board requested a leadership reassessment review, not of Mara, of Elise. Elise didn't lose her title overnight. Copeland was too polished for something so public. They preferred transition plans, gentle reassignments, quiet reshufflings. But inside the building, the air had shifted. People watched Elise differently now. Her laughter at meetings didn't land. Her instructions were double-checked. Junior staff, once eager to be seen with her, now kept a slight distance. No one said it outright, but everyone knew. She'd been trusted with a storm, and she'd failed to bring an umbrella. Mara didn't gloat. She kept her posture quiet, humble. She let Alan take the spotlight in the client recovery briefings. She responded to Elise's emails with professionalism. She made no jokes, showed no satisfaction. That was important. Revenge wasn't real unless it looked like restraint. The official announcement came 3 weeks later. Elise would transition to a new strategic role focused on future-facing brand innovation. Her responsibilities in crisis and reputation would be redistributed. There was no mention of Mara, at least not in the memo. But the week after, the company launched a Crisis Excellence Task Force, chaired quietly by Mara, reporting directly to Alan and the board. She was not given Elise's title, not yet. She didn't mind. She preferred not to sit in a borrowed seat. She wanted to build one of her own. Still, she knew better than to assume a single win meant permanent respect. Corporate memory was short, and boards had selective vision. She had seen it before. A woman cleans up the mess. The room applauds. Then they bring in a visionary man 6 months later with no scars on his hands. So Mara kept going. She nurtured the relationships she'd been building across departments. She invited people from legal and HR to pre-crisis reviews. She included junior analysts in postmortems. She began documenting internal knowledge gaps, not as complaints, but as guidance. Then she started reshaping narratives, gently. During a quarterly training, she offered a case study about the beverage incident. She didn't name Elise. She didn't need to. She just outlined what happens when storytelling outruns substance. How confidence without process can burn a brand down. The room listened. Even Alan nodded. But it wasn't just Elise she was watching now. The board member Elise had seduced, David Mott, still sat in his chair, still voted on promotions, still hosted his quiet, catered dinners for rising stars. Elise may have lost her ground, but David had enabled her. He'd whispered the right things in the wrong ears and helped install a leader who couldn't lead. Mara didn't want him removed. That would make noise. She wanted him irrelevant. So she went looking, not for dirt. She didn't deal in scandals, but for patterns, votes, biases. She reviewed his track record on internal promotions, noted how often he pushed for fresh perspectives, and how those perspectives happened to be women under 35. She compiled the data, just numbers, just history. Then she looped in a woman named Kiara from governance, young, sharp, and mostly ignored. Kiara had a passion for board ethics and a frustration with performative diversity. Mara fed her the numbers, suggested she pitch a board modernization framework, term limits, rotation policy, conflict of interest disclosures. She helped Kiara shape it, polish the language, and frame it as progressive governance. When the proposal landed on the board's desk a month later, Mara's name wasn't on it, but David's discomfort was. He pushed back, called it overreaching, claimed it could undermine cohesion. But Kiara had allies now. Other board members, especially two women who had once been quietly bypassed for committee chairs, backed the plan. It passed, narrowly. David's influence shrank. Elise stayed in her strategic role, but her days of shaping careers were over. She spent more time in brainstorms and pitch decks than in leadership sessions. Her email signature lost a line. And yet, Mara didn't feel triumphant. What she felt was something quieter, a settling, like standing alone in a room after a party's ended, hearing the buzz of silence for the first time. Then, almost anticlimactically, the opportunity came. A merger. Copeland was preparing to join with a global firm based in Toronto, Meridian PR. It would double their size. But it came with redundancy risks, new reporting structures, and a painful truth. Only one SVP of crisis would be retained. The board held internal interviews. Alan sent Mara a message. "You're our lead candidate. Let's talk contract terms." She read it 3 times. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply booked a meeting. When the contract offer came, she made one request. It wasn't about salary or perks. She asked that, should she accept, the role be formalized in writing with direct board accountability. No verbal promises. No ambiguous titles. She had served too many years in interim roles with no anchor. Alan blinked, then nodded. Fair. On her way out of his office, she passed Elise. Their eyes met, just briefly. Elise gave her a faint, crooked smile. Not warm, not bitter, just human. A silent acknowledgement of how things unfold. Mara nodded once. That night, she sat alone in her apartment with a glass of wine and signed the offer. Not because she needed power, but because she'd earned it without shortcuts. Because she had rebuilt something quietly, stone by stone, and now it stood. A structure no one could take from her. The new role came with a view. Corner office, frosted glass, a mahogany desk that whispered status and authority. But Mara hardly noticed. She arrived early, kept her door open, and let the morning light spill across her desk as she sorted through what the merger had left behind. There was no victory lap, just transition. Meridian's integration plan was swift. New reporting lines were drawn, departments realigned, redundancies reviewed. Faces disappeared from Slack channels. Familiar voices didn't log in to morning meetings. Copeland's history, though honored in press releases, was dissolving at the edges. Mara didn't resist it. She adapted. Her task wasn't just to survive the merger. It was to own her space within it. That meant understanding Meridian's culture. More aggressive, more global, faster in execution, looser in structure. But vulnerable. They had been burned by bad press 2 years ago. An environmental lobbying scandal they never quite recovered from. Their crisis protocols were fragmented, their chain of command unclear. Mara mapped it all. She began scheduling quiet one-on-ones with Meridian staff. Not just VPs and execs, assistants, junior analysts, former agency freelancers. She asked open questions, listened more than she spoke, and made careful notes. She found cracks. Meridian's real weakness wasn't strategy. It was ego. Too many senior people who thought their charm could override risk. Too many decisions made at golf outings and private dinners, not inside secure war rooms. That was her leverage. So she made herself useful, quietly indispensable. In meetings, she asked the questions no one else wanted to answer. What's our failure protocol if the new pharma account gets subpoenaed? How fast can legal greenlight a product kill switch? Who speaks for us if the Toronto office goes dark during a media escalation? They didn't always like her tone, but they remembered it. And when a minor data breach hit one of the client sites just days after the full integration, she was the only one who had a pre-approved holding statement ready. That earned her a call from Meridian's global CEO. He didn't flatter. He just said, "We'd be in a deeper mess without your prep." She replied, "I plan for the fires no one wants to believe will happen." He said, "Good. Keep planning." After that, the Meridian teams stopped trying to treat her like a carryover from a smaller firm. She wasn't a relic. She was the spine. It was around this time that Elise resigned. No fanfare, no announcement, just a calendar notice that vanished. An email auto-response saying she was pursuing new opportunities. Mara didn't inquire further. She assumed Elise had seen the writing, the shrinking circle of influence, the slow fade from relevance. The board didn't ask Mara for a statement. There was nothing to be said. One afternoon, a former assistant of Elise's, Mira, stopped by Mara's office. She left her notebooks behind, Mira said. Should I shred them? Mara considered that, then shook her head. Keep them in records for 6 months. After that, let them go. Mira nodded. There was something in her eyes, a small question she didn't voice. Everything okay? Mara asked. She used to talk about you, Mira said quietly. Before? Said you were the one to watch. Mara paused. And after? Mira hesitated. Said you were the one she couldn't control. That landed in Mara's chest heavier than she expected. Not pain, not pride, just understanding. Elise had always seen power as control. Mara saw it differently. That weekend, Mara took no calls. She spent Saturday morning in her apartment with the windows open, a notebook in her lap. Not for plans, for reflection. It had been nearly 2 years since Elise's promotion. 2 years since the quiet betrayal that started all this. And she realized something unexpected. She didn't think about Elise much anymore. Not with anger. Not with bitterness. Just as a chapter. A necessary one. Her revenge hadn't been fire. It had been erosion. She hadn't ruined Elise's career. Elise had done that herself. Mara had simply stopped protecting her from consequences. That was the distinction. She hadn't become cruel. She had just stopped being loyal where it wasn't deserved. By Monday, she was ready to start thinking bigger. The merger had bought her influence. But influence wasn't a destination. It was leverage. She pitched a new initiative to the board, a cross-continental crisis response unit, blending legal, comms, and risk management into a streamlined, single-decision body. It would be expensive, slow to implement, and politically messy, but it would work. And more importantly, it would solidify her legacy. The board debated. Meridian hesitated, but eventually, approval came. Mara was granted authority to build the first unit, pilot office in New York. And just like that, she was no longer the woman who cleaned up other people's messes. She was the architect of how future crises would be prevented altogether. The New York pilot office opened 6 months later in a glass tower just south of Bryant Park. Sleek, efficient, built not for appearances, but for action. 3 floors of cross-functional teams, legal, communications, compliance, strategy, trained not just in their own silos, but in the interwoven logic of damage control. Mara oversaw it all. She didn't need to micromanage. She set principles, not preferences. Every crisis lead had to be able to think 3 levels deep. Every strategy memo had to be read by someone not in its original department. They ran simulations every quarter. No one got comfortable. That was the point. The unit quickly became known, internally at least, as the core. It wasn't glamorous. No one tweeted about it. But when the Toronto office faced a union data leak, the core was already on the phone before the first journalist called. When a major luxury brand client had their creative chief publicly accused of misconduct, it was Mara's team that stepped in. Not just to clean the mess, but to rewire the narrative. They didn't protect clients from the truth. They positioned them in front of it, responsibly and fast. That became Mara's real legacy, building something that couldn't be taken from her. One evening, as the New York office settled into a quiet hum, Mara walked the floor alone. Desks were tidy, lights dimmed. The city pulsed below, indifferent and infinite. She paused at the glass wall and looked out, her reflection faint in the window. Older now, still sharp, but softer around the edges. She thought about Elise. Not often, but sometimes. She had heard Elise had taken a position at a smaller firm on the West Coast. Creative strategy, something loose and digital. A place where charm still carried weight and consequences arrived late. Mara hoped, quietly, that Elise had learned something. But she didn't need to know. Some people serve as warnings, others as lessons. Elise had been both. A week later, during the annual board review in Toronto, Mara was invited to present a 5-year vision. She wore gray. No bold colors, no dramatic entrance, just a calm presence and a stack of facts. She walked them through the core's early metrics, reputation scores, risk resolution times, pre-escalation containment rates. Then she outlined a proposal to expand it globally. London, Dubai, Singapore. The room was still. David Mott was no longer present. He had stepped down quietly after the new term limit policy. The man who once shaped futures with whispered dinners was now just a footnote in governance records. After the meeting, the board chair approached her privately. "Powerful presentation," he said. "You've come a long way." "I was always here," Mara replied. "I just stopped waiting to be seen." He nodded slowly. "What would it take to keep you here another 10 years? Mara didn't answer immediately. She looked past him, out the window, where the skyline cut sharp against the clouds. For most of her career, she had played the long game. Earned trust, stayed steady, chose silence over drama and loyalty over spectacle. It had cost her, sometimes years, sometimes dignity, but not herself. Never that. "I'll stay," she said at last, "as long as the terms are real." "And what are the terms?" the chair asked, half smiling. She turned back to him. "This time," she said quietly, "let's put it in writing." No smile, no flourish, just the truth. And that was how Mara kept her seat. Not through seduction, not through spectacle, but through structure. One deliberate move at a time, like rebuilding a house after a fire, stone by stone, with no interest in being anyone's story but her own.